Hello everyone, this is Stjepan and welcome to Hanging Pawns. In today's video I'm going to go over the basics of the Ruy Lopez or the Spanish game, which is one of the strongest weapons you could add to your opening repertoire. And while most other openings come and go, drop in popularity and then make a comeback when a novelty is discovered, the Ruy Lopez or the Spanish game is the best and most solid choice for E4 players from beginner to super GM level, and that will never change because the idea of the opening follows the best opening rules and principles, and it just can't grow old. I'm going to go over the main variations briefly in this video, but each one will be covered in detail in an individual video. The opening starts after e4 by white, challenging the center and attacking the f5 and the d5 squares. Black replies with e5, stopping white's main plan, which is to push his queen's pawn from d2 to d4, which would create a formidable center and give white an advantage. And white now replies with second move knight to f3, which is challenging the e5 pawn, attacking the e5 pawn, and supporting d4 once again, so simply continuing to push his idea of creating a strong center. And black once again has to stop that with the most logical move, knight to c6, once again stopping the d4 push and defending the e5 pawn. And white now puts more pressure on both squares indirectly. By challenging the c6 knight, he plays bishop to b5. And this is now the Ruy Lopez. This move is attacking the defender of e5 and d4, so indirectly forcing the d4 push and the capture of e5. And this is the starting position now of the opening. All the moves make perfect sense, but it's important to understand what the idea behind each move is in order to be able to follow the variations. From this move on, the opening branches out into three main variations, the main lines which lead either to the closed or the open Ruy Lopez, the Berlin defense, which starts after knight to f6, and the exchange variation. And black is the one who chooses now, and he has two main moves here. The first one is a6, and by far the most common one. This move is challenging the b5 bishop immediately, and the bishop only has two options in this position. Retreating back to either c4, d3 or e2 would be a waste of tempo, because white wouldn't keep the pressure on the c6 knight. So the most common idea is to go back to a4, which is still putting pressure on the c6 knight, and that's the starting position of most lines in the Ruy Lopez. And another way white could react to a6 is by simply taking on a6 without retreating, so bishop takes c6, and this is the easiest variation to learn, I would say. This is the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. And in this position white is simply saying, okay, I'm going to put pressure on e5 by removing the defender, simply removing the defender. And after d takes c6, one common idea of this opening now is that white is counting on his pawn majority on the king side, which is far superior to black's pawn majority on the queen side. And that's it. He just has 4 to 4 on the king side, as opposed to black's 4 to let's say 3 to 4 on the queen side, and black will be unable to force his pawns forward, and white will be able to perhaps even create a passed pawn after some central pawns get exchanged. And this means that in any endgame, white will have an advantage. Despite the same number of pawns, white has a better pawn structure. And in this position, of course, white can't take the e5 pawn, which perhaps you might have thought after he took the knight on c6. If he takes, then black is able to simply respond with queen to d4, and this is one of the most common opening traps in the Ruy Lopez. And after the knight retreats, queen simply takes, and black will have equal material with a better position. After this exchange happens, white has forfeited castling rights, and black stands a little bit better. But after d takes c6, the position is still very complex. There is a lot of lines in the exchange Ruy Lopez, and I will be covering them in a separate video. But this is the second way to react. So after a6, white either takes the knight or plays bishop to a4. And bishop to a4 is the most common move. And after this, black has a few ways to continue playing, but by far the most common one, and how 99% of games are played, are with black continuing with knight to f6, simply putting pressure on e4. White castles, the pawn on e4 still can't be taken because white will be able to play rook to e1 and pressurize both the e4 knight and the e5 pawn. So black continues with bishop to e7, and after rook to e1, this is the closed Ruy Lopez. And once again, 99% of games continue with b5, bishop retreating to b3, castles, c3 and d6. And this position now is I would say, the starting position of the closed Ruy Lopez, and this position can be seen in probably 20% of top Grandmaster games which start with d4, e5. And this position, the closed Ruy Lopez, is with the Berlin defense and the Marshall attack, the third most common line after e4, e5, e4, e5. White in this position has one more move which simply has to be played, and that's h3. And after h3, White has completed the first part of his plan, and he is now letting Black choose how to continue the game. The arrows here are indicating the most common plans for both sides. First of all, White's main plan in this position from the start of the opening, from 1 e4, 2 f3 and 3 bishop b5, the point of each of those moves up till now is to push the d4 pawn forward and to create a strong center with d4. That was the purpose of the c3 move, that was the purpose of every move so far, that's to push the d4 pawn. Black is in a way trying to stop that, but he also has plans of his own. And the second plan by White is to transfer the undeveloped b1 knight to the g3 square, and this is one of the most common maneuvers in chess, and almost every closed Ruy Lopez game sees that maneuver. So the point is to transfer the knight to d7, to f1, and then to g3, and from this point on, White is able to start an attack. And Black, on the other hand, has a few plans of his own. Firstly, he might try to get the knight out of the way for the f-pawn to move, which is Black's pawn break in the position. Another idea is to push the c-pawn, but for that to happen, the c6 knight has to move. It will either go to a5, to b8, or perhaps even waste a few more moves to move and to let Black be able to play c5 or c6 in some positions. And Black is also attempting to play d5 in some positions and to break in the center himself. But from this position, the black side has to choose how to continue. And there are two main variations from this position. The first one is knight to b8, which is the Breyer variation of the closed Ruy Lopez. And the point of this variation is that Black is trying to remaneuver his knight to a much more useful square, which is d7. And from d7, it's making room for the c-pawn to move and to break in the center. And it's also defending the e5 pawn, which is making the main push for Black d5 a real possibility now. And from this position, White is able to continue in several ways, Black as well, and I will cover the variation in a separate video too. After h3, the second most common variation Black could go for is the Chigorin variation, which starts with knight to a5. The point of knight to a5 is that Black is gaining a tempo on the b3 bishop, which has to retreat to c2, which is why c3 was placed in the first place, along with pushing the d4 pawn. The point is to give a retreat square for the bishop. And after the bishop retreats in this position, Black plays c5, and that's the point, that he got to play c5 with tempo, and he got to remaneuver his knight back into the game with tempo. And I will just give a nothing move to White just to show the point of that. Black is now able to put the knight back into the center to c6, and if you notice, the pawn is no longer on c7, it's now on c5, and Black has definitely gotten something out of the position, and he made the White bishop retreat as well. So these are the two main continuations from the closed Ruy Lopez. But this is the position you have to remember, because many games, and almost all the games in the closed Ruy Lopez will look like this. And if you were watching the candidates tournament we just finished 2 days ago, there were, I think, 7 or 8 games which started in this position, and the players just get to this point playing a tempo, wasting absolutely no time, and then they start thinking. And the other variation, which doesn't go into the closed lines after bishop to b5, the other most useful variation to know is the Berlin defense. And I'm sure you heard about it, and the variation gained so much in popularity in the recent years that it's becoming one of the strongest weapons for Black, especially when he's trying to draw a stronger opponent. And the variation is so well analyzed and so well known that it's very hard to surprise your opponent, even at lower levels. And you absolutely have to know it if you play e4 or if you play e5 in response to e4, because if you don't know the theory, the chances are that you are just going to lose. The variation of the Berlin defense doesn't start with a6, which is the most common move in the Ruy Lopez, but black plays knight to f6 instead, and this is now the Berlin defense. Once again, this variation has a few lines white and black could choose, and I will show them in a separate video when I will do the detailed analysis of the Berlin defense. But the most common line, which is called the so-called Berlin endgame, goes like this. White castles in this position, knight takes e4, d4, knight to d6, attacking the bishop, bishop takes on c6, d takes e5, chasing the knight away, and after the knight goes to f5, the queens get exchanged, and this is the starting position of the Berlin defense. And this position was introduced to high-level chess by Vladimir Kramnik in his 2000 World Championship match against Garry Kasparov, in which he actually managed to defeat Garry Kasparov using the Berlin as a surprise weapon. And after the match, when Kramnik won, people just realized that if Kasparov can lose to this, then it must be really strong, despite looking kind of weird for black, and it seems that white has a big advantage. But the point of this position is, even though black has forfeited castling rights, he has the bishop pair, and he has the possibility of creating a stronger attack in the middle game, and if he manages to get something from the initiative he is able to create, he will be better. In exchange for that, white has a much better pawn structure and of course castling rights. So the point of the position, and there were games recently, for example, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave played a game with 20 or 30 moves of theory, in which every move is analyzed to perfection, and the point is that white is trying to create a passed pawn on the king side, and all of these pawns are free to move, and he has a 4-3 pawn majority on the king side, so white realistically is able to create a passed pawn, while black, on the other hand, has a pawn majority on the queen side, but if you notice, the c pawns are doubled, so there isn't really a chance of him creating a passed pawn. So, in theory, any piece exchange favors white, because the less pieces on the board, the pawns become more important. So, if you imagine all the pieces being off the board, white would be clearly winning, because he would be able to create a passed pawn, and therefore, black has to create something with his bishop pair, and he has to gain some initiative before exchanges happen. And now the opening is so well analyzed, and there are so many lines that I can't even begin explaining them now. I will go into much more detail in a separate video on the Berlin. Okay, I would like to go over a few more variations of the Ruy Lopez which are worth knowing. In the main position, after bishop to a4, bishop retreating, so going for the closed Ruy Lopez line, knight to f6, castles. Instead of bishop to e7 going for the closed Ruy Lopez, black is able to play two more variations which are really strong and are much more offensive to white than the closed lines. The first one is the Archangel variation, which starts with b5, immediately pushing the white bishop away to b3, and black now develops with bishop to b7. And this position is trying to catch white off guard, one could say, and to gain quick development for black. And if you notice, the black king is still in the center, the bishop from f8 hasn't moved yet, but black is creating a lot of pressure on the e4 pawn with the bishop on b7, and he's starting to create an attack early on, as opposed to getting into the closed lines, which after this position look a bit more passive for black, and they are actually giving white a free hand in the center and letting him push the d4 pawn in exchange for something else for black. After castles, so the Archangel variation is b5, another variation black could go for is knight takes e4, and this is the so-called open Ruy Lopez. And same as the Archangel variation, the open Ruy Lopez gives a lot more attacking chances for black, but it also means that white is able to attack much sooner because the black king is still in the center. One more very, very important variation after castles, now black is going for bishop to e7, the main closed Ruy Lopez lines, rook to e1, b5, bishop to b3 castles, and c3. From this position, black doesn't have to play d6, which is going for the Breyer, the Chigorin, the Karpov variation, and so on. Black is able to play a much more aggressive move, d5, striking in the center immediately, and this is called the Marshall attack. And in the recent years, this has become the most aggressive weapon black has against the Ruy Lopez. But sadly, it's been considered the drawing weapon, as some lines are analyzed up to 30 or 40 moves deep, and they have been calculated up to a forced draw. But however, the position creates a lot of imbalances and gives attacking chances to both sides. And the point of the variation is that black is sacrificing a pawn for the initiative. The main line, and the only line that's played after d5, is e takes d5, knight takes d5, and now white is able to go a pawn up and take a central pawn by knight takes c5, knight takes c5, and rook takes c5. And in this position, if you notice, white has 7 pawns, black has 6 pawns, but the attacking chances for black are much better, and black is able to create a lot of initiative in just a few moves. He has to defend the knight first with c6, d4, and now bishop to d6. And in this position, you can see what black sacrificed the pawn for. If you notice white's queenside pieces, the rook, the knight, the bishop, and the queen are still completely undeveloped, stuck on their original squares, and black is starting to create a menacing attack using his bishop pair and the queen. And if you imagine the queen coming to h4, which is actually what happens in most Marshall attack games, then black has a lot of compensation, and even more than enough for the pawn he sacrificed. And in most games, white is actually forced to give material back just to be able to survive. But as I said, the variation is so well analyzed that now, on top level, it usually ends in a draw. Okay, so just to recap, the Ruy Lopez after bishop to b5 is one of the most common openings in chess, and it's actually the most solid opening, and it's considered that you can't become a good player unless you know it perfectly. And that's partly true, because in the Ruy Lopez, the better player wins. That's the common rule, and there isn't any surprises, there is no attacking gambits, there is no sacrifices. It's just that you have to know how to play positional chess. You have to know how to remaneuver your pieces. You have to know how. You have to understand squares, weakness of squares. You have to understand outposts. And only a player who is well versed in chess principles and opening principles is able to understand the Ruy Lopez. That's why studying this opening will develop each part of your chess skill, and I think it's absolutely essential. All the variations which I have shown now, the Berlin defense, the exchange variation, the variations of the closed and the open Ruy Lopez, will be covered in a separate video, one video for each, and I will go into a lot more detail on each variation with sample games and much more information on each one. Okay everyone, I hope you liked this video on the chess opening Ruy Lopez or the Spanish game, and see you soon with more chess videos. Goodbye, cheers!